Hi everybody, welcome back. Let's continue talking about Chapter 7, but let's focus on Section 7.4 where we discuss a search for causality. And this might be a little bit confusing to you because I mentioned that we cannot determine what causes what with a correlational study. If we have correlational data, there are always other potential explanations. Well, that said, we can attempt to at least develop some theories to establish causality from our correlational data. I mean, we're just trying to understand what's going on. We're not necessarily able to determine for sure what might be causing what when we're looking at a relationship between two variables, but we can look at some guidelines for trying to do that. So here are a few guidelines that are listed in the text, and you can read about them. I just want to highlight a couple of the ones that are a little bit more basic and a little bit more important, really, for you to understand. Let's look at this first one, for example. Look for situations in which the effect is correlated with the suspected cause, even while other factors vary. So let me give you an example. Let's say that I know from some research, correlational research, that there's a relationship between the amount of violence that kids view, like on TV, and how aggressive they tend to act with other people. So I see there's a relationship, and I'm trying to determine, is it really due to the violence that they're watching on TV? Well, one thing I can see here is, does that effect still exist while I vary some other factors? So for example, it's possible that it really has more to do with the parenting style that the kids' parents engage in. Well, I can look at a variety of different kids who have been raised under a variety of different circumstances. If I find that the effect is still there, then I can see the effect of watching the violence on TV still persists even among different types of parenting styles. So in other words, I'm trying to see if the suspected cause is still there while other factors vary. Let's focus on this one as well. Look for evidence that larger amounts of the suspected cause produce larger amounts of the effect. If one thing is causing another, it's somewhat reasonable to assume that if we have more of that causal factor in place, we would see more of an effect. So in the example I was listing before, am I finding that the more kids watch violent TV, I'm starting to see that they're even more aggressive? Now that's the basis for a correlation, but this is essentially looking to see the strength of the relationship. Like, am I really finding that consistent trend? Kids who are watching more and more and more violence on TV are acting more and more and more aggressively. And of course, the counter of that would be true as well. Kids who are watching less and less of that violence on TV, are they acting less aggressively? So if I can find evidence like that, then there is some hope that maybe it is that watching violence causes someone to act somewhat aggressively. And the next thing that I just wanted to mention was this fifth point. If possible, and this is the main point in my mind, test the suspected cause with an experiment. If an experiment cannot be performed with humans, consider doing the experiment with animals, cell cultures, computer models. Correlational research, in my mind, is a great start. I don't care about these different guidelines, and I don't care about fancy statistical techniques that supposedly can help you determine causation from correlational studies, because the bottom line is you can't determine causation from correlational studies. But that doesn't mean correlational studies are horrible. They're wonderful in helping us understand relationships. And then we can follow up those studies with true experiments. So for example, let's say I'm seeing very interesting correlational research that shows that kids who are watching violence on TV tend to be more violent, tend to be more aggressive when they're dealing with other people. I can design an experiment to test that. I can bring kids into a lab. I can randomly assign some of them to watch some violent programming. I'm sure they'd love watching that. And I can have some other kids randomly assigned to watch something just entertaining, something that's kind of funny. And then later on, I can put them in a situation when they're dealing with other kids, like during play. And then we can code how aggressively they're playing with other kids. And these types of experiments have been done. And because in those situations we're randomly assigning people to groups, we'd expect those two groups to start off approximately equally. So later on, if we find that the kids who are randomly assigned to watch violence, if they are more violent, That's a good explanation then. Now we found some good evidence that violence watched on TV leads to aggressiveness later on when these kids are playing. So that's the point right here. If you have some suspected cause, try to get it into a laboratory study or something like that where it can be manipulated experimentally. All right, that's all I want to say about this stuff. That's it for section 7.4. For now, that is all.